The silence within the grand ossuary of the Zaltora Empire was not merely an absence of sound. It was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket of anticipation that pressed against the chitinous armor of the High Council. The chamber itself was a marvel of ancient engineering, carved from the core of a hollowed-out moon, its walls rising kilometers into the darkness, lined with the silent, glowing alcoves of 10,000 minor lords and tributary governors. At the center of this abyssal amphitheater sat the triumvirate, the three supreme rulers of a galaxy-spanning dominion that had never known defeat, their thrones elevated on pillars of anti-gravity that hummed with a sound felt in the marrow rather than heard by the ear. They were waiting. The entire empire, spanning star systems too numerous to name without the aid of a cogitator, was waiting. By all calculations, by every metric of stellar warfare and hyperlane logistics, the Grand Armada, the largest accumulation of military might since the War of the Broken Suns, should have transmitted the signal of victory 3 standard cycles ago. The invasion of the small, blue marble world designated as Sol 3, inhabited by a species known as humanity, was a mathematical inevitability. It was to be a harvest, a simple acquisition of resources and biological distinctiveness to be catalogued and subservient to the Zaltora. Yet the void remained silent. No tachyon burst of triumph, no quantum-entangled image of the burning ruins of Earth cities, just the cold, indifferent static of deep space. High Exarch Vok, the central figure of the triumvirate, shifted his immense bulk, the movement causing the light from the bioluminescent fungi adorning his ceremonial robes to ripple in waves of agitated crimson. His compound eyes, capable of perceiving the electromagnetic spectrum in 12 distinct bands, twitched with a nervousness he would never verbally admit. To his left sat Matriarch Lythra, the weaver of strategies, her slender, multi-limbed form coiled tightly around her data stream interface, her mandibles clicking in a rhythmic, subconscious code of anxiety. To his right was Krell, the War Master, a creature of scar tissue and cybernetic plating, who stared into the holographic projection of the Sol system with a focused intensity that suggested he was trying to will the fleet into existence by sheer force of hatred. The silence stretched, elongated by the relativistic distortion of their anxiety, becoming a tangible entity in the room. The gathered thousands of the court, usually a cacophony of sycophantic whispering and political maneuvering, were statue, still, their fear of the triumvirate overridden only by the greater fear of the unknown. If the Armada had fallen, it was impossible. If the Armada had defected, it was inconceivable. If the Armada had simply vanished, it was terrifying. Then the sensor grid screamed. It was not the majestic, harmonic chime of a returning victorious fleet, nor was it the chaotic, jagged alarm of a retreating remnant. It was a single, piercing tone, a solitary ping on the grand strategic display that dominated the ceiling of the ossuary. One ship. Not a dreadnought, not a carrier, not even a frigate of the escort class. It was a vessel of such negligible tonnage that the automated defense batteries of the moon station initially classified it as debris or a navigational error. It drifted out of the hyperlane exit point with a lazy, unhurried grace, its engines pulsing with a crude, chemical warmth that offended the refined sensors of the Zaltora. It was a human shuttle. A diplomatic courier, unarmed, unshielded, and radiating a chaotic spectrum of analog radio waves that sounded like static noise to the advanced receivers of the Empire. The audacity of it was paralyzing. Where was the Leviathan-class flagship, the Eater of Worlds? Where were the 10,000 interceptors? Where was the conquest? There was only this speck of metal, painted in white and blue, gliding into the heart of the most heavily fortified sector in the galaxy as if it were arriving for a scheduled tea time. Krell, the War Master, was the first to break the paralysis, his voice a grinding tectonic rumble that shook the dust from the upper tiers. "Destroy it," he commanded, his cybernetic claw slamming onto the armrest of his throne. "Vaporize the insult. If they send a gnat to mock us, we shall burn it before it can land." But Matriarch Lythra raised a slender hand, stopping the order before it could reach the gunnery crews. "No," she hissed, her voice like dry leaves skittering over stone. "Look at the trajectory, look at the transmission codes. It is not attacking, it is hailing us, and it is using the High Imperial cipher." Vok leaned forward, his massive head tilting. The High Imperial cipher was a code known only to the triumvirate and the highest admirals of the fleet. For a human vessel to possess it meant that the unthinkable had happened. The Admi. Ral of the Grand Armada had given it to them, or they had taken it from his corpse. "Let them land," Vok intoned, his voice booming through the amplification crystals, silencing the rising murmur of the court. If they have killed our fleet, one small ship poses no threat. If they have not, we must know why the galaxy is silent. Bring the creature to us, unharmed. The arrival of the human representative was a slow, agonizing process that seemed designed to test the patience of the alien court. The shuttle docked with a clanking mechanical inelegance, and for a long hour nothing happened. The airlocks hissed, decontamination protocols were run, and the grand doors of the ossuary eventually groaned open. The court expected a warrior, a blood-soaked general, or perhaps a cybernetically enhanced monster to match their own prowess. What walked through the doors was a disappointment that bordered on insult. It was a male of the species, of average height, wearing a simple suit of woven biological fibers, dark and unarmored. He carried no weapon, no datapad, no visible technology. He walked with a casual, relaxed gait, his hands loosely clasped behind his back, looking up at the vaulted ceiling and the thousands of alien eyes staring down at him with a mild, polite curiosity. He looked less like a messenger of doom and more like a tourist visiting a museum. He walked the length of the obsidian bridge, a kilometer-long span over the cooling vents of the moon's reactor, without a tremor of fear, despite the lethal drop on either side and the palpable psychic pressure of the hostile minds surrounding him. When he finally reached the base of the triumvirate's pillars, he did not kneel. He did not bow. He did not offer the ritual salute of submission. He simply stopped, looked up at the three towering figures, and smiled. It was a small, tight expression, devoid of mockery but filled with a terrifyingly calm confidence. "Greetings," the human said, his voice amplified by a small device on his lapel, speaking perfect, unaccented High Zaltora. "I am Ambassador Elias Thorne. I apologize for the delay." Traffic was complicated. The banal statement hung in the air, absurd in its simplicity. Krell roared, the sound vibrating the very air in the ambassador's lungs. "Traffic! You speak of the grand armada of the Zaltora as if it were a herd of cargo drones. Where's my fleet, creature? Where are the legions sent to bring your world to heel? Did you detonate your own sun to stop them? Did you poison the void? Speak, or I will peel the flesh from your bones to find the answers." Ambassador Thorne did not flinch. He waited for the echoes of the War Master's shout to die down, his expression unchanging. "The fleet is safe," Thorne said softly. "They are. Resting, they are currently undergoing processing." The word processing sent a shiver through the court. To the Zaltora, processing meant biological recycling, the rendering of flesh into nutrient paste. Lithra's mandibles twitched rapidly. "You claim to have defeated the Armada?" she asked, her voice analytical, probing for the lie. "We detected no energy signatures consistent with a battle of that magnitude. No wreckage, no distress beacons. Physics does not allow for a fleet of that mass to simply vanish without energetic discharge." Thorne nodded, as if agreeing with a bright student. "You are correct, Matriarch. There was no battle, not in the way you understand it. We did not fire a single shot. Your ships entered the Sol system, they assumed attack formation, and then they stopped, they listened, and then they landed. And they have decided not to return." "Mutiny," Vok bellowed, his crimson lights flaring to a blinding white. "You claim the Grand Admiral, a sign of the blood of kings, turned traitor? Impossible. The loyalty conditioning of our soldiers is absolute. It is written into their genetic code." Thorne sighed, a very human sound of weariness. He reached into his pocket, causing 100 guards to raise their weapons, and pulled out a small, primitive storage device. He placed it on the floor. A hologram sprang to life, hovering in the air between the human and the triumvirate. "It was not mutiny," Thorne said. "It was an awakening. You see, you made a fundamental error in your analysis of humanity. You looked at our history, our wars, our weapons, and you assumed we were a warrior species like you. You prepared for a fight, but you didn't prepare for a conversation." The hologram flickered into focus. It showed the bridge of the Eater of Worlds. The Grand Admiral, Vok's own nephew, was standing not at his command console, but at a table. He was not wearing his helmet. He was holding a glass of amber liquid. Sitting across from him was a human, an elderly woman with laughing eyes. They were talking. The audio filtered through. They were discussing philosophy. They were discussing the burden of command. The Admiral was weeping, not in pain, but in a release of emotion so profound it looked like agony. He was laughing through the tears. The scene shifted. It showed barracks where Zaltora shock troopers, bred for violence, were sitting on grass, actual biological grass, watching a sunset, surrounded by human children who were climbing on their armor. The soldiers were not killing. They were frozen in awe, touching the flowers, tasting the air. "What is this sorcery?" Krell whispered, horror dawning in his eyes. "You have poisoned their minds. You have used chemical agents to sedate them." "No chemicals," Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming serious for the first time. We used the one weapon you have no defense against. We used Earth itself, and we used the truth. He took a step forward. You call your empire the perfect order. You strip your citizens of individuality, you breed them for function, you suppress their dreams to serve the state. It makes for a very efficient military machine, but it creates a hollow soul. When your soldiers entered our system, we didn't jam your comms with static. We jammed them with art, with music, with history. We broadcasted the entire sum of human culture on every frequency. We showed them what life looks like when it is free, and then we invited them for dinner. The absurdity of the statement was like a physical blow. You invited them? Lythra asked, her logic centers failing to process the data. We invited them, Thorn confirmed. We dropped our shields, we powered down our weapons' batteries, we turned on the runway lights, we sent a message. You have come a long way, you must be tired. Come eat, rest, and then if you still want to kill us, we can do that tomorrow. It is a very old human strategy. Xenophobia requires distance. Hate requires abstraction. When you sit down with your enemy, break bread with him, look him in the eye, and ask him about his children. It is very hard to pull the trigger. Thorn gestured to the hologram, which now showed a massive feast in a park in New York. Thousands of alien soldiers eating alongside humans, confused, overwhelmed, and utterly defeated by kindness. Your admiral didn't defect because he hates you, Thorn said. He defected because for the first time in his life, someone asked him what he wanted, and he realized he didn't want to be an admiral anymore. He wants to paint. He's actually quite good at it. The silence in the ossuary was now different. It was the silence of a worldview shattering. The Zaltora had conquered 1,000 worlds by breaking their bodies. They had never encountered a species that conquered by capturing the soul. Vox stared at the human, his mind racing. This was a contagion, a plague of individuality. If this fleet did not return, if the truth of what happened spread to the other fleets, the Empire would not fall to invasion. It would dissolve from within. You are monsters, Vox whispered. You are not warriors, you are corruptors. You dissolve the very fabric of duty. Thorn's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold, hard iron. We are what we need to be. We are the mirror. You came to us with chains, and we showed you what it means to have hands. But do not mistake our hospitality for weakness, High Exarch. We didn't absorb your fleet just to save ourselves. We did it to save you. Save us? Krell scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual fire. You speak of saving the masters of the galaxy? Thorn nodded. The masters of a small, quiet corner of the galaxy, he corrected. We have been watching the stars for a long time, even before we had warp drive. We listen, and we hear things you ignore because your sensors are tuned only for prey. Thorn tapped his lapel, and the hologram changed. The scene of the peaceful feast vanished, replaced by a star chart. It was a map of the galaxy, but the outer rim was marked in jagged, pulsing red lines. You believe you are the apex predators, Thorn said, but you are merely the biggest fish in a drying pond. There is something coming from the intergalactic void. We call it the silence. It has consumed 3 satellite galaxies already. It does not conquer. It does not negotiate. It unmakers. The red lines on the map began to move, simulating a creeping darkness that swallowed star systems whole. Your empire is rigid, Thorn continued, his voice echoing with the cadence of a lecturer. Rigidity is brittle. When the silence hits you, you will break. Your soldiers, trained only to obey, will not know how to adapt to an enemy that defies logic. Your fleets, designed to fight starships, will be useless against a foe that eats physics. You would be extinguished in a century. He looked at each of the triumvirate in turn. We, however, humans are chaos incarnate. We are adaptable, insane, contradictory, and stubborn. We survive ice ages, plagues, total wars, and our own stupidity. We are the cockroaches of the cosmos, High Exarch. And right now, we are the only Hing standing between you and extinction. So you stole our fleet to protect us? Lythra asked, skepticism dripping from her voice. To upgrade them, Thorn corrected. Your ships are powerful, but they are dumb. Your soldiers are strong, but they are blind. We are integrating them. We are teaching your navigators how to think intuitively. We are teaching your gunners to aim with their hearts as well as their targeting computers. We are retrofitting your engines with human chaotic drive theory. We are building a coalition. The fleet you sent to destroy us is now the vanguard of a combined defense force, and we are here to offer you a choice. Thorn spread his hands. You can declare war on us. You can send the rest of your armadas. We will welcome them too. We will feed them, entertain them, and turn them into poets and philosophers, and you will be left alone on your dark thrones until the silence comes to eat you. Or you can join us. The sheer arrogance of the proposal was breathtaking. A single human standing in the heart of the Zaltora capital, offering terms of alliance as if he were the conqueror. Vox looked at the hologram of the creeping darkness, then at the human. And if we refuse, if we kill you where you stand? Thorn shrugged. Then I die and the fleet stays on Earth and you lose, but if you accept, if you open your borders to us, we will not conquer you, we will not rule you, we will simply mix. We will bring our music, our food, our loud, messy democracy. We will annoy you, we will frustrate you, but we will make you stronger. And when the silence comes, we will face it together, standing side by side, not as masters and slaves, but as brothers in the dark. The debate that followed lasted for 3 days. The triumvirate argued, raged, and threatened. Thorn stood his ground, sleeping on the floor of the chamber, eating rations from his pocket, answering every question with a terrifying calmness. He explained the concept of soft power. He explained the human history of assimilation. He told them stories of how enemies on Earth became allies against greater threats. He showed them that the Zaltora definition of strength was incomplete. Strength was not just the ability to destroy, it was the ability to endure, to adapt, to inspire. Slowly, the mood in the chamber shifted. The fear of the unknown human weapon, this empathy, began to transform into a cautious curiosity. The War Master Krell, seeing the tactical simulations of the silence, realized that his current strategies were obsolete. The matriarch Lithra, analyzing the efficiency of the human integrated fleet, saw a logic she had missed. And High Exarch Vok, looking at the image of his nephew painting a sunrise, felt a strange, unfamiliar pang in his chest. It was envy. Finally, the decision was made. It was not a surrender, they told themselves. It was a strategic realignment, a temporary alliance. Vok stood, his voice weary but resolute. "Ambassador Thorn," he rumbled, "you have spoken of a threat from the void. You have stolen our fleet with words and food. You have insulted our traditions and mocked our order. But you offer a path to survival. The Zaltora do not die. If adaptation is required to survive, we shall adapt. We will not submit to you. But we will, listen, we will send a delegation to this Earth. We will see this shield of Saul for ourselves, and we will prepare for the silence." Thorn bowed a genuine, deep bow of respect this time. "That is all we ask, High Exarch. The universe is a big, scary place. It's better to have friends than subjects." As he turned to leave, the heavy atmosphere of the ossuary seemed to lighten. The dread was gone, replaced by a buzzing confusion and a new, fragile hope. The human walked back across the obsidian bridge, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He paused at the door and looked back. "Oh, and High Exarch," he called out. "My nephew sends his regards. He says he's working on a portrait of you. He thinks he can capture the inner light behind your eyes. I think you'll like it." With that, the human left. The doors closed. The triumvirate sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Krell looked at Vok. "A portrait," he grunted. "What is a portrait?" Vok looked at the empty doorway, a strange emotion taking root in his dual hearts. "I do not know," he said softly, "but I think I would like to find out." The invasion of Earth had ended before it began, not with a bang, but with a handshake. And as the Zaltora Empire turned its gaze toward the creeping darkness of the Outer Rim, they did so not as lonely conquerors, but as part of something larger, something chaotic, and something terrifyingly, wonderfully human. The transition from enemy to ally was not seamless. It was a grinding of gears between two civilizations that operated on fundamentally different axioms. The Zaltora were a species of vertical hierarchy. Every drone knew its place, Ev. Uri command flowed downward, and questioning an order was a defect in the neural pathways. Humanity, by contrast, was a horizontal mess of overlapping circles, arguments, and dissent. When the first Zaltora delegation arrived on Earth, not as conquerors but as observers, the culture shock was nearly fatal. They expected a planetary capital, a monolithic fortress from which the humans directed their chaotic empire. Instead, they were taken to Geneva, then to Tokyo, then to a small farm in Nebraska, then to a chaotic music festival in the desert. They saw a world that seemed to be constantly on the verge of collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions, yet remained stubbornly, robustly stable. They saw leaders who were mocked by their citizens, a concept that caused the Zaltora diplomats to hyperventilate. In the Empire, mocking a leader was suicide. On Earth, it was a Tuesday late-night show segment. Ambassador Thorn became the guide for High Counselor Xylo, a rigid bureaucrat who had been tasked with understanding human governance. They stood on a balcony overlooking a sprawling metropolis that glowed with 1 billion lights. "It is inefficient," Xylo noted, his data slate whirring as he tried to calculate the energy waste. "Why do you allow so many independent choices? Why not centralize the distribution of resources? You have hunger, you have crime, you have conflict." "The Empire has none of these." Thorn leaned against the railing, sipping a cup of coffee, a substance Xylo had analyzed and determined to be a mild neurotoxin that humans ingested for recreation. "We have those things," Thorn admitted. "But we also have innovation, we have art, We have the ability to solve problems that don't exist yet because someone was bored and started tinkering. Your empire is perfect for a static universe, Xylo, but the universe changes. And when it changes, the perfect structure shatters. We don't shatter, we bend, we argue. We patch things up with duct tape and hope, and that makes us dangerous. Integration of the fleets was the first true test of this new alliance. These Altora ships, massive and heavily armored, were triumphs of brute force engineering, but their targeting systems relied on pre-calculated algorithms that assumed the enemy would behave rationally. The human engineers, swarming over the alien hulls like ants, were horrified by the lack of redundancy and the rigidity of the code. They began to fix things. They installed manual overrides. They added chaotic logic subroutines. They painted nose art on the sleek, holy obsidian hulls of the dreadnoughts, pin-up girls, sharks with open jaws, and symbols of ancient human myth. These Altora captains were initially apoplectic. To deface a warship was heresy. But then came the war games. In a simulated combat scenario near Jupiter, a mixed fleet of human and Zaltora ships faced off against a pure Zaltora simulation configured to the old Imperial standard. The result was a massacre. The human-crewed ships did things that were statistically impossible. They pulled maneuvers that stressed the airframes to 110%. They fired solutions based on gut instinct rather than firing locks. They broke formation to cover each other in ways the computer could not predict. The pure fleet, unable to calculate the chaotic variables, was decimated. These Altora crews, watching their human counterparts whooping and cheering over the comms, felt a stirring in their blood. For the first time, war was not just a duty, it was a rush. It was personal. They began to understand the human concept of glory. It wasn't about the state. It was about the ship next to you. It was about survival. But the true turning point came when the silence finally arrived. It was not a fleet. It was not an army. It was a signal. A frequency that originated from the dark space between galaxies, a scream of entropy that hit the outer colonies of the Zaltora Empire like a tsunami. It scrambled computer cores. It drove telepathic species insane. It turned the very laws of physics brittle, causing stars to flicker and gravity to fluctuate. The Zaltora panicked. Their rigid command structure collapsed as communication buoys failed. The central processors, unable to compute the illogical nature of the attack, went into loop lock. The triumvirate, sitting on their thrones, watched as sector after sector went dark. They issued orders, but the orders made no sense in the face of an enemy that was not a physical force, but a corruption of reality itself. Then the humans stepped in. While the Zaltora were trying to calculate a solution, the humans were improvising. Ambassador Thorn, now acting as a liaison on the command deck of the Eater of Worlds, looked at the chaotic readings. "It's a mimetic virus," he realized, shouting over the panic of the alien bridge crew. "It's attacking the logic centers. Cut the main data links. Switch to analog." The Zaltora hesitated. To go analog was to go B. Lind, it was to become primitive. "Do it!" Thorn roared, shoving a frozen alien officer aside and slamming the emergency cutoff switch. The holographic displays died. The buzzing in their heads stopped. The ship was dark, lit only by emergency chemical lights. "Now," Thorn said, his voice calm in the gloom. "We fight with our eyes, we fight with our hands." The humanized fleet, operating on manual controls and shielded by their chaotic, decentralized nature, engaged the entity. They didn't try to outcalculate it. They broadcasted noise. They blasted heavy metal music, prime number sequences, conflicting philosophical texts, and sheer gibberish on all frequencies. They created a logic shield, a wall of chaos that the silence could not penetrate because it couldn't find a pattern to corrupt. These Altora pilots, guided by human co-pilots, learned to fly by feel. They learned to ignore the ghosts in the machine. They fought back. And for the first time in the history of the galaxy, the encroaching darkness paused. It recoiled. It had encountered something it could not consume, a mind that was already broken, already chaotic, and therefore immune to the breaking. The battle for the nebula of lost souls was the climax of the war. A rift had opened, a wound in reality where the silence was pouring through, twisting the nebula's gases into horrific shapes. The combined fleet stood before it. The Eater of Worlds, now sporting a massive painted emblem of a Terran wolf on its prow, led the charge. Admiral Vox's nephew, now calling himself Commander Art, stood on the bridge. He didn't look at the tactical display. He looked out the viewport. "All ships," he broadcasted, his voice steady. "The enemy is logic. The enemy is order. Today we are the storm. Today we are human." The fleet surged forward, a chaotic swarm of metal and fire. They didn't fire in volleys. They fired at will. They rammed. They detonated warp cores to create shockwaves. They did the unexpected. The rift destabilized. The entity, unable to process the sheer volume of unpredictable data, began to fracture. It couldn't predict the movement of a pilot who decided to spin his ship simply because it felt right. It couldn't corrupt a computer that was already running a simulation of a 20th century dating sim in the background. The humans had weaponized their own absurdity. With a final, silent scream, the rift collapsed. The silence receded, pushed back by the sheer indomitable noise of humanity and their new friends. In the aftermath, the galaxy was changed. The Zaltora Empire did not dissolve, but it evolved. The triumvirate still ruled, but they ruled differently. They established a senate. They allowed art. They allowed dissent. They realized that a rigid tree snaps in the storm, but the bamboo bends. Humanity did not conquer the galaxy, but they permeated it. You could find human restaurants on the moons of Jupiter and Zaltora heavy metal bands touring the colony worlds. The fear of the invasion of Earth had become a joke, a historical footnote. No one returned from the invasion of Earth, the saying went, because once you tasted freedom, you never wanted to leave. Years later, an old Elias Thorne sat on a bench in a park on the Zaltora capital world, a park that hadn't existed before he arrived. He was watching a group of young Zaltora playing a game that looked suspiciously like soccer, though with more limbs and less gravity. High Exarch Vok, now retired and walking with a cane, sat down beside him. The ancient alien looked at the children, then at the human. "We were afraid of you," Vok said, his voice raspy with age. "We thought you were weak because you were divided. We thought you were prey." Thorne smiled, watching the ball fly into the air. "Everyone makes that mistake," he said. "We look soft, we look loud, we look disorganized, but that's our armor, Vok. You can't break what doesn't have a rigid shape." Vok nodded slowly. "The silence is still out there," he murmured. "It will come back, not today, perhaps not for 1,000 years, but it is patient." Thorne leaned back, closing his eyes. "Let it come," he said. "We'll be here, we'll be louder, we'll be weirder, and we'll have more friends." Vok chuckled, a sound that was now familiar and warm. "Yes," the alien agreed. "We will be ready, my nephew, the painter. He finished that portrait, you know." Thorne opened one eye. "Oh. Is it hanging in the grand hall?" Vok shook his head. "No, it is hanging in my private quarters. It is chaotic, it is messy, it has too many colors." The alien paused, a strange softness in his voice. "It is beautiful." The two old warriors sat in silence, watching the sunset of a binary star system. Around them, the galaxy spun on, no longer a cold, clockwork mechanism of empire, but a vibrant, noisy, messy living thing. The invasion had indeed begun, but it was not an invasion of fleets or armies. It was an invasion of ideas, and the Galax. Why would never be the same again? The great silence of the void had been filled with the sound of laughter, of arguments, of music, and of life. And in the face of the encroaching dark, that was the only weapon that mattered. The timeline of the integration accelerated in ways that defied socio-political models. Within a generation, the distinction between human and Zaltora technology began to blur into a hybrid aesthetic known as Terran Imperial. The grand, imposing architecture of the Zaltora homeworlds, once monolithic slabs of gray and black, began to sprout vertical gardens, neon signage, and erratic architectural additions that served no structural purpose other than aesthetic joy. The humans, in turn, adopted the longevity treatments and the disciplined focus of the Zaltora, tempering their chaotic impulses with a newfound appreciation for long-term planning. But the most profound change was in the Council of Worlds. It was no longer a place of fear. Ambassador Thorne passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 140, his life extended by Zaltora medical science, but his legacy was cemented in the Great Hall of Unity. A statue was raised in his honor, not depicting him as a conqueror standing atop a mountain of skulls, but sitting at a table, offering a glass of water to an empty chair. The inscription read, "He defeated us by making us guests." It was a lesson the galaxy took to heart. New species were discovered not by armada but by exploration ships manned by mixed crews. When a new civilization was encountered, the first message sent was not surrender, but hello. We brought snacks. However, the universe holds old grudges, and the silence was not the only ancient thing lurking in the dark. Deep in the galactic core, near the supermassive black hole that anchored the spiral arms, there slept the remnants of the precursors, the ones who had built the mass relays, the ones who had seeded life, the ones who viewed the current younger races as a failed experiment. They were the custodians, and they were waking up. They saw the chaos spreading. They saw the infection of humanity destabilizing the perfect order they had curated for eons. They saw the Zaltora, once a promising candidate for stewardship, now corrupted by democracy and art. The custodians did not invade. They simply turned off the lights. Simultaneously, across 1,000 systems, the hyperspace lanes collapsed. The ancient gates that allowed for faster-than-light travel ceased to function. The galaxy was instantly fragmented, isolated into pockets of local space. Panic should have ensued. Civilization should have collapsed into starving, isolated fiefdoms fighting for resources. That was the custodian plan: isolate, starve, and reset. But they had not calculated for the human factor. On a remote outpost in the Vega system, a human engineer named Sarah and a Zaltora physicist named Cathal stared at the dead hyperdrive console. "The lanes are gone," Cathal clicked, despair in his voice. "We are stranded. We will die here." Sarah didn't panic. She got angry. She kicked the console. Then she grabbed a wrench. "Physics didn't stop working, Cathal," she snapped. "Just the shortcut. If the road is closed, we build a new road or we go off-road." Across the galaxy, this scene repeated. The humans refused to accept the impossible. They ignored the despair of their alien counterparts and started hot-wiring the universe. They remembered the slipspace theories that had been abandoned as too dangerous. They remembered the warp skipping that was theoretically suicidal. They tried it anyway. Ships blew up. Crews vanished. But some made it. A network of smugglers' routes, pirate channels, and jury-rigged wormholes began to stitch the galaxy back together. It was ugly, dangerous, and completely unregulated. It was perfect. The custodians, watching from their core citadels, were baffled. The localized collapse should have resulted in silence. Instead, the radio waves were increasing. The species were talking to each other via ancient light-speed comms chains, relaying messages of hope and schematics for illegal engines. "Hold on," the messages said. "We're coming to get you." And they did. The human Zaltora rescue fleet, a ragtag collection of retrofitted freighters, mining barges, and pleasure yachts, began to jump into isolated systems, bypassing the dead relays entirely. They brought food. They brought news. They brought the middle finger to the custodians. When the custodians finally emerged from the core to purge the infection manually, they found a galaxy that was not broken but hardened. They arrived in their sleek, geometric ships of white light, expecting to sweep away primitive resistance. They were met by a wall of absolute insanity. A Zaltora dreadnought, welded together with 3 human carrier hulls, fired a weapon that weaponized a solar flare. A swarm of human fighters, painted in garish colors, danced THR. All the custodian formations, broadcasting mockery. The custodians tried to hack the fleets, but they couldn't hack a system that was held together by duct tape and manual breakers. The battle for the Galactic core was not a strategic engagement. It was a riot. The custodians, ancient and powerful, fought with the precision of a scalpel. The Alliance fought with the brutality of a brick. They didn't care about efficiency. They cared about winning. They rammed the custodian citadel ships with asteroids fitted with engines. They boarded the pristine vessels and fought in the corridors with shotguns and plasma blades. They unleashed the Terran biologicals, dogs, cats, and even emus, into the sterile environments of the enemy, causing panic among the pristine, germ-free custodians. In the final confrontation, the Prime Custodian, a being of pure energy and intellect, communicated with the Alliance flagship. "Why do you resist?" it broadcasted. "Order is peace, chaos is suffering. We bring you the peace of the stillness." The response came from a young human admiral standing next to a Zaltora high priest. "We don't want your peace," she said. "Your peace is boring. We like the noise. We like the struggle, because in the struggle we find out who we are. And we are not your experiment. We are the variables you forgot to account for." The custodians were pushed back, not destroyed, but forced into a stalemate. They retreated into the event horizon of the central black hole, locking the door behind them, unable to comprehend a galaxy that refused to be tidied up. The Alliance claimed the core. They built a station there, a massive, ugly, beautiful station that served as the new capital of the United Galactic Federation. It was a place where a Zaltora could open a bakery, where a human could learn to sing the songs of the deep crystals, and where the concept of invasion was remembered only as the moment when the galaxy realized that the scariest thing in the universe wasn't a monster. It was a friend who wouldn't take no for an answer. And on Earth, in a quiet museum, the original message from the invasion fleet was still playing on a loop. It was the report from the first scout ship that had landed, the one that had been captured by hospitality. The audio was grainy, but the voice of the alien scout was clear. "Command," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Do not fire. They are not armed with plasma. They are armed with pie, and it is delicious. I am aborting the mission. I am going to have seconds." The screen faded to black, but the story didn't end. It simply continued, written in the stars, a chaotic, messy, wonderful epic of a galaxy that learned that the strongest force in the universe wasn't gravity, or electromagnetism, or the weak nuclear force. It was the stubborn, irrational, infectious power of connection. The invasion of Earth had indeed begun, and it had conquered the universe without firing a shot. And somewhere in the deep dark, something else was watching, and for the first time in eons it was afraid. Because it knew that if it ever tried to attack this chaotic, loud family of species, it wouldn't just be fighting an army. It would be fighting a neighborhood, and neighborhoods look out for their own. The end was not a terminus but a horizon. The ships kept flying, the music kept playing, and the silence never returned. The galaxy was too loud, too bright, and too alive, and that was just the way the humans liked it. These Altora, once masters of silence, now hummed along, their voices joining the chorus, a harmony of two species who had found the answer to the Fermi paradox. Where is everyone? They're at our place. We're having a party. The long peace that followed was known as the era of the open hand. It was a time when the budget for military conquest was reallocated to terraforming and exploration. The massive shipyards that once churned out destroyers now built colony ships, vast arcs designed to carry mixed populations to the furthest reaches of the spiral arms. But the universe, in its infinite complexity, is never truly safe. There are always shadows. There are always thresholds. And humanity, with its insatiable curiosity, always wants to know what is on the other side. Deep in Sector Z99, a region of space designated as navigational hazard by the Old Empire, a joint research vessel detected an anomaly. It wasn't the silence. It wasn't the custodians. It was a structure. A ring world, but not of matter. It was built of solidified light, a construct of such impossible physics that looking at it caused headaches. The UGS Curiosity approached slowly. The sensors picked up a signal. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a greeting. It was a question, "Are you done yet?" The message baffled the crew. "Done with what?" Captain Holloway asked the empty air. The response came instantly, bypassing the comms and manifesting as text on every screen. "Done with the tutorial," the crew sent. Art at each other. The Zaltora science officer, whose feathers were ruffled in agitation, tapped his console. "This energy signature, it predates the universe. It predates the Big Bang." The realization hit them with the force of a collapsing star. The universe they knew, the struggle against the silence, the war with the custodians, the integration of their species. It was all a test, a filter. "We are the progenitors," the text read. "We built this reality as a crucible to see if a consciousness could arise that was capable of transcending the binary of order and chaos. We have watched you. You, the humans, and you, the Zaltora, you fused the thesis and the antithesis. You created synthesis. You passed." The ring of light began to expand, opening a gateway not to another star system, but to another plane of existence. A realm of infinite energy, of geometric perfection and chaotic potential existing in harmony. "The nursery is closed," the message continued. "The true universe awaits. Will you step through?" Captain Holloway looked at his Zaltora first officer. He looked at the image of Earth on his desk. He looked at the vast, beautiful, messy galaxy they had built. "Step through," he muttered. "And leave all this?" He smiled, that distinct, stubborn human smile that had terrified emperors and baffled gods. "Hey," he said to the screen. "Thanks for the offer, but we're not done here. We've still got a lot of redecorating to do, and I promised my kid I'd take him fishing next weekend." The entity paused, the ring of light pulsed. "You refuse ascension." "We don't refuse it," the Zaltora officer added, his mandibles clicking with amusement. "We postpone it. We like this reality. It has texture, it has friction. Perfection sounds boring." There was a long silence from the ancient construct. Then, for the first time in the history of the multiverse, the progenitors laughed. It was a sound like the birth of galaxies. "Very well," the text read. "Then the playground is yours. Surprise us." The ring collapsed into a single, shining diamond, which drifted into the hull of the ship and integrated itself into the core. The engines roared with a power that defied measurement. They had been given the keys to the kingdom, not because they conquered it, but because they loved it enough to stay. The curiosity turned back toward home. The news would take weeks to spread. The universe was not a cage, it was not a test. It was a home, and they had just been given the deed. As the ship engaged its warp drive, leaving a trail of impossible colors in its wake, the galaxy seemed to shine a little brighter. The invasion of Earth had begun with a silence, but it ended with a promise. A promise that no matter how dark the void, no matter how cold the stars, there would always be a light on in the window, a seat at the table, and a story waiting to be told. The humans and the aliens, now indistinguishable in their shared destiny, moved forward into the endless night, not with fear but with anticipation. For they knew now that the darkness was not empty. It was just a canvas waiting for them to paint, and they had brought plenty of paint. The final log of the era was recorded by a child, a hybrid of human and Zaltora lineage, sitting on the beach of a terraformed world under a violet sun. "My grandfather told me," the child spoke into the recorder, "that people used to be afraid of the sky. They thought monsters lived there. But he told me that we went up there and we looked for the monsters and we didn't find any. We just found other people who were afraid of the dark, so we held their hands. And now nobody is afraid anymore." The child turned off the recorder and looked up at the stars, which were thick and bright above. "Except the monsters," the child whispered with a grin full of sharp, friendly teeth. "They're afraid of us because we brought the party." And in the silence of the cosmos, the laughter of a united galaxy echoed forever, the ultimate victory of a species that refused to just survive, but insisted against all odds on living. The invasion was over. The celebration had just begun.